Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks. Today we are here for a Tag Tuesday. Every other Tuesday I do a tag video and I was recently tagged in one, so I thought I would get to it finally. And the tag is the Bring Browsing Back book tag. The original tag was by Karen at Roving Reader and I was tagged by Kim at Middle of the Book March. Thank you so much, Kim, I appreciate the tag. This is a really short tag and it's just about your browsing habits and how books that you found have affected your life and your perspective on things. I like it because it's got a couple deep questions and I'm a big book browser, so this is kind of my wheelhouse anyways. Question number 1, magic of discovery. Share a book you found while browsing that you may not have discovered otherwise. All right, so the book that I'm gonna share for this prompt might seem kind of odd because it's a fairly popular contemporary author, but at the time that I found this book, I was not really into Bookish social media at all. I was still a pretty decent reader, but I wasn't like posting on Instagram or following BookTube at all. So I didn't know who trendy authors were. I wasn't aware of like who the popular books were by. And all I saw was this gorgeous book cover across the bookstore from me, and it looked like everything I loved. So I went over and picked it up, and that was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. One thing that I really love about Silvia Moreno Garcia is that she is such an interesting writer. So she centers most of her stories within Mexican culture, specifically in Mexico, although she has written some stuff that, happens stateside a little bit. I really love that she focuses on different eras and different genres with every book that she writes. I think that's such a cool thing. So this book, for example, is set in 1920s and it starts in Yucatan Peninsula, but then it goes up to Mexico City, into the Baja Peninsula, and even across the border at one point. I've read another book of hers that's pretty recent, Velvet Was the Night, which is a 1950s noir. She has Mexican Gothic, which I believe is also like in the 1950s era, but like Gothic horror. And every book is something new. Every time I pick up one of her stories, I never know where she's gonna set it, what time frame she's gonna approach it with, or what style she's gonna write. And the thing that's even more remarkable is how well she does every single style that she approaches. So this book for me, the reason that I picked it was because it started a good relationship with an author. I always love it when you find one book and then that leads you down a whole backlist of books that you get to enjoy. So that would be my book that I found browsing that I might not have discovered otherwise. Prompt number 2, expanding world. Share a book that has made you view things from a different perspective or exposed you to new ideas. So I'm going to talk about 2 different books from this prompt, and both of them are fairly recent contemporary authors, and both of them are a little bit different perspectives than I would naturally read. So the first one is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. So first of all, Ocean Vuong is a poet typically, and this was his first non-poetry book. So I'm not super into poetry, not that I don't appreciate it as a medium or that I don't love a poem when I read it, but as far as sitting down and reading like contemporary poetry collections, it's not really my thing. I should probably try to do it more than I do, but I haven't thus far. So I typically wouldn't necessarily pick up something that came from a poetry background, but I had heard so much about this book and how good it was. Now, Ocean tells here a story about the immigrant experience in America, specifically being Vietnamese in a area that was predominantly white. He talks about growing up, the challenges of like his mother and grandmother not speaking English well and having to translate for them. He talks about, the cultural differences and how he was bullied at school for being Asian, for being short and more feminine. He talks about his struggles with sexuality and all sorts of different things. He talks even about family comes from the generation that fled the Vietnam War. So he talks about like post-war experiences and post-war trauma that his family deals with. And there's just so much in this that like I personally wouldn't experience if I didn't read it. And so for me, this was a book that really opened my eyes and challenged me to look at some perspectives I might not naturally get to experience. The second book that I wanted to talk about from this prompt is The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. I recently buddy read this with my friend Ali Loves to Read over on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, you should give her a follow. She's awesome, posts a lot of great content, very, very diverse reader, and just a really fun, cool person. So we buddy read this and we both were pretty shook by the end of this for different reasons. For me, what I found eye-opening about this is this book is set in Nigeria. Initially, it deals with somebody who feels that they do not fit in with society. They're struggling to find their place, they're lost, depressed. Society, instead of supporting them, even their parents and their family, instead of supporting them, are really critical. And you can tell that criticism and the actions maybe come from a place of love, but they're misinformed actions. And as the story progresses, we find that this person is struggling with their gender identity specifically. So this community in Nigeria that they're living in deals with this in ways that I have not seen nor experienced in California, or really just generally on the West Coast of the United States. And then their experiences finding love and the relationship that they fall into also were kind of eye-opening. And there was parts where I had to remind myself, like I felt uncomfortable and had to remind myself, look, this isn't my culture, this isn't my normal, and it's okay. Like I don't need to view it through an American lens, I guess. And so that's what I liked about this book, is that it challenged me to take off the American lens and look at like worldwide different cultures and customs and reactions to experiences and the way that people deal with things based on the knowledge that they have and the cultural beliefs that they have. So I thought this was a really good book, and I really appreciated it for that reason. I thought that it was moving, impactful. It gave me a view into gender identity in a country that maybe doesn't welcome people who are trans. So I thought that was, like I said, a really worthwhile read for that reason. It's definitely a little difficult, and there are some very triggering things in it. If you're sensitive, definitely look those up before you read it. But if you want to read something that's going to challenge your thoughts and perspectives, this is a good one. Question number 3, open to change. Share a book that has changed who you are as a person or altered your day-to-day browsing habits. Wow, there's so many books that I could list, and I actually picked 5 different books for this stack. I'm going to talk about each one a little bit. I'm kind of separating them from childhood to young adult Caitlin and adult Caitlin, because they've affected me for various reasons, and all of them have affected my habits as a reader and a browser. So the first book is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I found this book probably in like 7th or 8th grade, and it was a monumental shift for me. It was the first time that I really felt like immersed in a book and wanted to just devour the whole series. And so for me, this became the thing that inspired me to really get into reading. I mean, I was reading other things at the time. I was already in certain series that were popular at the time, but this, for whatever reason, made something click in me as a reader, and I started getting a lot more into the fantasy world. I started reading fan fiction. I started reading a whole bunch of stuff that I hadn't gotten into prior. And then I have The Hunger Games, which also kind of shaped me as a reader and a browser, because it spoke to the angry, frustrated teenager in me when this came out. I guess I wasn't even a teenager. When was this published? I have to think about this. This was published in 2008. Okay, so 2008, I would have been like 20. And I was frustrated, and I was working my ass off, and I felt like I was in a system that didn't support me and didn't support my partner specifically at the time as well. And this really touched something in me there. And it was the first time I think I felt like, it sounds cliche, but like that girl empowerment, like that women could burn down the world and rebuild it kind of. And it developed in me a love for dystopian fic, a love for strong female characters, and also kind of made me feel empowered to be more active and make changes in the world around me. So this one definitely had a big effect on future reading habits, browsing, all that kind of stuff, because now I definitely go for dystopias. And then the third one from the past is actually a current installment from the past, but only because I don't have the past book. Does that make sense? Kim actually talked about this in her own video. And then I have The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, which is the second book to The Handmaid's Tale. So The Testaments for me wasn't particularly groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but The Handmaid's Tale was. I think I was like 16 when I read it, and that blew my mind. It just kind of shattered my whole world. The concept of women being enslaved, raped, and then forced to bear children as a child or a young adult, I don't think I could imagine anything more horrific. I mean, as a grown woman, I also think that that's like one of the most horrific things I could imagine personally. But I also know that the world is full of many, many dark, horrific things. The thing that I think is very interesting about it specifically is that as a 16-year-old reading it, it shocked me and horrified me in the way that I viewed it as a fantasy world, where like, oh, this doesn't ever happen in reality. Like, no woman would allow herself to be subjugated this way. If they started doing this, all the men that were married to these women would fight back. All the women that were being subjugated would fight back. As an adult, I think it actually becomes even more horrifying because of all the horrors you've seen in the world by that point, like all the genocides, all the mass rapes, all of the totalitarian dictatorships, all the brutality that you see in the world. And then you start to realize like, holy shit, this isn't that far of a stretch to reality. And then, so that book was at the time and still is one of the most relevant reads. And it's crazy how it just stays relevant no matter what time frame you read it. And so that would definitely be one that also really altered me as a person deeply. I think it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that sometimes the horror in the books that we read is actually horror that exists in reality. And for me, that is scarier. And then two books that have recently kind of changed my browsing habits as an adult are Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse and Iron Widow by Jiranjay Zhao. So both of these books are fantasy, and I think what they've kind of changed in me as a browser is that I'm starting to realize, like, now at this point in my life, I like a much more complex and darker, maybe even morally gray fantasy. Like when I was younger, I wanted a very straightforward fantasy, a bad guy, a good guy, you know, a conflict that's resolvable, hero wins. And I'm realizing as an adult that I don't necessarily need that. I don't need the neat and tidy end. I don't need the hero to be a great person. I don't need the bad guy to be exclusively bad. I want to feel conflicted. I want to feel like I'm not sure who I want to win. And I think both of these books really exemplify that well. Most of the characters in Black Sun are morally gray. There's nobody that's like really a straightforward, amazing person. All of them do things that are pretty detestable, and I'm not sure who I'm rooting for. I just finished Fevered Star, which is the second book in this series, and I'm still not sure who I'm supposed to be rooting for. But that makes it such a good book. And then in Iron Widow, Wu Zetian, the main character, she's brutal, and you understand why she's brutal. Like, the system that she's in is terrible, and she has to be brutal to overcome it. But it kind of shapes her into this brutal person, and you see the potential for her to go from rescuing Washia to becoming like the brutal dictator of it. And I'm rooting for her, but like also with that caveat in mind that like I may have to stop rooting for her at some point because she might turn into this like brutal dictator. So both of these have made me seek out probably a little more darker, more complex fantasy, and not dark in like smutty dark. I'm not talking A Court of Thorns and Roses here. More like Poppy Wars is another good example. So I've really been in a kick for dark, complex, morally gray fantasies lately. And then prompt number 4 is to browse a bookstore, library, or a friend's shelves. So I am a big browser, and I actually tend to browse fairly frequently. I spend almost every Monday at my local library because they have a yoga class that I like to take in the morning. They have a little coffee shop so I can get like breakfast. And then I usually will take a book or like whatever I'm working on and hang out there for the day. And they always have some really good sales racks. So I'll sit there and like browse for books. They recently had an amazing library sale, like a blowout, get rid of all their stock and start over. So I had an insane haul from that. And that was like going in with no idea what I would find, just browsing and picking out what sounded interesting. I got a ton of stuff that I actually hadn't even heard of, wasn't familiar with, but just sounded like it'd be a good read. If you're interested in that, you can take a look up here. There will be a link. But I think for the purpose of this prompt, I'm gonna take you with me to go browse the shelves at the used bookstore in the West Sahara Library. Hey guys, I'm here for prompt number 4, book browsing. So we are at the West Sahara Library. As I told you, I was gonna check this out today. So we're gonna go take a look in their bookstore and see what we can find by browsing the shelves. See you in a moment. I just finished browsing the used bookstore in the West Sahara Library. I'm kind of bummed because I had hoped I was going to find a lot of books, a lot of hidden gems, but unfortunately it was mostly just a lot of like serial stuff. So a lot of James Patterson, Sue Grafton, that kind of stuff that I'm not really into reading. I did find a couple things, so let me show you what my browsing got me. The Leavers by Lisa Ko. I've been wanting to read this one for a while, so I was excited about that. And then I found a book called The September of Shiraz by Dalia Sofer. I was not familiar with this book, and I just happened to find the cover really pretty, and then I read the summary, and it is about a man in Iran, and I believe he's being interrogated, and to do with, you know, the political situation in Iran at the time. So that sounded pretty interesting to me. And then I also picked up one more book. This big hefty book here, Freedom by Jonathan Franzen. I have actually never read a book by Jonathan Franzen. I know that he recently dropped Crossroads, which is somewhat popular on social media, and I'm familiar with his name as an author, but I can't say that I know what style writing he does or anything about his books really. So I thought I'd give that a shot. We'll see. Maybe it'll be my cup of tea, maybe it won't. Never know if you don't take any risks. So I hope you've enjoyed this little segment of browsing and enjoyed seeing the library a little bit. Back to the book tag. Prompt 5 is to tag people. So I'm going to tag 4 accounts. All 4 of them are lovely, and I think all 4 of them technically fall into the small booktube accounts, except one of them is above 1,000 now, but even still relatively small accounts. So I'm going to be tagging Kedavan Reads, Bookworm.wander, The Midnight Reader, because she just came back after being gone for a couple months. Welcome back, Rustica. And Brandon's Bookshelf. So I'm really interested in hearing from all 4 of you about your browsing habits and the books that made a big impact on you. I hope to see your videos soon. And if you like this video, hit the thumbs up and let me know in the comments down below, where is your favorite place to browse for books? Do you like to go to the library like I do for the used book racks, or do you go to like new bookstores, Barnes and Nobles, little free libraries, friends' shelves? Tell me all about it. And make sure you hit the thumbs up button and the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. That way we can make sure we see each other again in another video. Thank you so much for joining. Again, I'm Caitlin Bandy. This is my channel, Bandy's Books. Bye.